I'm Colleen. I am an MPS student in International Development in IPCALS. I'm just about finished with my coursework in just a few short weeks, and then I'll be finishing up my project paper, which is based on gender equity in coffee value chain development. So everything we're going to talk about today. And just to give you an overview of my background, I am a certified or a licensed coffee grader with the Coffee Quality Institute. I do a lot of training for coffee development initiatives. I work with the Specialty Coffee Association of America. I consult on grant-funded value chain projects for coffee in Uganda and Indonesia. I've done some work in Malawi, but this was my first time to Rwanda to work with an organization called the Relationship Coffee Institute. Today I'll be talking about what they're doing with coffee value chain development inside of Rwanda, specifically for the domestic market, but I'll also sort of go over a little bit about the gender equity issues in coffee supply chain development in general. I'm really laid back, so if you guys have questions during any of the presentation, please just raise your hand, and it's more fun for me to do it that way, and maybe for other people as well. So. Basically, I'll start by talking about coffee value chains. Some of my colleagues in the room or former classmates have seen this portion of the presentation before. I'll be talking about gender lens application into coffee supply chain development initiatives and also in coffee value chains, and then get into a little bit about the work that I'm doing, that I had been doing and continue to do with the Relationship Coffee Institute in Kigali. So coffee production, in case you did not know, coffee is the seed of a cherry that grows on a shrub, and it's a self-pollinating shrub that basically, after about 9 months after flowering, the cherry matures, and inside of which is a little seed that's full of different sorts of compounds and acidities and sweetness levels. And so what you drink on a daily basis, maybe you're drinking right now, is actually the dehydrated and caramelized seed of this particular cherry. So that's the really appetizing description of coffee that you guys really love every day. So the thing about coffee production, though, is that this specific type of species that we're interested in coffee supply chain development for specialty grade coffee is called Arabica coffee. And Arabica is a species that has a very narrow window of the climate that it produces in, that it produces really well. And the majority of Arabica coffee is grown by smallholder production. So about 25 million smallholder farmers who are both landowners and landless laborers derive incomes from coffee production. So it's a very, very high labor commodity, and it's a very long value chain to get from quality as it's produced in the production environment and to the coffee that you're drinking probably back there from Mandeville today. Something to note about Arabica coffee is that the daily price is set on the New York C market or commodities market. This is I think a 5-year sort of trend of Arabica coffee prices, and you can see how volatile the market is. What's really key to this, to sort of looking at this graph, is because coffee, when you are renovating your coffee fields, from the time that the coffee is planted in the nursery to when it starts to produce in your fields for income, it takes 3 years. So if you're in 2011 and the coffee prices start to peak and you're doing a renovation cycle and you start planting more of a specific type of variety for Arabica coffee, by the time you start harvesting in 2014, you've lost a lot of income. You're very much exposed to this risk. This is also an issue if you look at sort of the daily or even monthly fluctuations. That leaves cooperatives open to a lot of risk. When cooperatives start to buy coffee from smallholder producers, by the time that they turn around and sell it and contract it to an importer, the market could have gone down and they could have lost thousands and thousands of dollars. Yes?
Why is the price so low if there's a real problem with coffee roasting?
The price is so low because of oversupply. I mean, so this is based on a little bit on market fundamentals. Right now, I think supply is about the same level as demand in global coffee consumption. So that leads to a lot of speculators entering the market, right? So there's speculation in terms of weather cropping outcomes, say in Brazil. Brazil has the market share of coffee, Arabica coffee production in the world. And they have really high efficiencies there. They have direct-to-market strategies, and they're large farms, so they're able to do, certain labor-saving technologies that smallholder farmers in mountainous regions can't do. When you're talking about coffee rust, which happened last year, that didn't affect the market at all. Just a bit of background, a little sidetrack. The coffee rust epidemic of 2013 and into 2014 affected 56% of the farms in Central America. Basically led to a complete defoliation almost overnight of coffee fields, and it didn't affect the market because of the oversupply that was projected to come out of Brazil. So this is one of the reasons why coffee prices are so low. Another reason is because of the amount of speculation in the market just in short selling trades for futures contracts. So if you see that the market was down at about $1 per pound, that's roughly an estimated 60% or 60 cents lower than the estimated cost of production for smallholder farmers. So it's not always a winning or a losing battle, as you can see, depending on your strategy, which is very difficult for smallholder farmers to create a proper strategy around the risks in the market and the risks in the environment. Coffee is grown. This is what we call the coffee belt. It's between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. You can see that these are really resource-poor regions traditionally, or periphery zones. And so when I'm talking today about global value chains, I'm really talking about the global export and import. I'm not talking about, if Brazil produces coffee and then it's roasted in country. So when I do the value chain analysis or just breakdown for you guys, that's what I'm talking about. The export from the producing countries to the consuming countries that are in the more core zones. Something else to note about Arabica coffee production in relation to quality, because there's this tight window between the two tropics there. There's a lot of mountainous regions, and Arabica coffee it generally produces higher quality in cooler climates. So when you hear the term mountain-grown coffee or shade-grown coffee as being equated or related to quality, that's a real thing. So the higher the altitude in which you're growing coffee, the slower the cellular respiration, the more sugars develop in the cherry before it's harvested. So if you are in the sort of the equatorial zone there, Colombia, then there's a reason why coffees from Colombia are so highly valued. There are many other reasons, but one of which is because of the altitude at which they're grown. Basic chain of custody from the production system. You can see that, as I said before, that they're traditionally smallholder farmers in the Arabica coffee production system. In Brazil, they're large land holdings, but throughout Central America and into East Africa and even in Indonesia, we find a lot of farming systems that are household farms, right? So I'm equating smallholder farms with domestic household farm decision making here. And the production system is typically less than 2 hectares of land, typically grown at the household level or nearby the household. And the production is really, the cycle is split into about 4 different phases: pre-planting in the nursery, planting in the fields and crop maintenance, harvesting, and then marketing. And then what I'll talk about in a little bit is how the first 3 sets of activities is typically defined as women's work, and then the marketing activity is typically defined as a man's work, man's job. So kind of think about the complications of who's doing what activities and who's doing the marketing and deriving the income. All the smallholder production needs to be aggregated at a certain point, and this can be done by local collectors that are coming to farms or coming to communities and purchasing coffee cherry, or maybe if the coffee was processed out of the cherry before it was sold, they'll collect the parchment. Aggregation centers can also be cooperatives or farmer groups. Can also refer to exporter warehouses in general. So these are just the sites at which coffee first transfers over from the smallholders to different points where the coffee begins to pile up. This is a key separation here of quality. It's a key area where quality can be degraded immediately. So you can have a producer that invests a lot in pruning techniques and in ripe cherry harvesting or in processing. But once the coffee gets aggregated, it could be then compiled with coffees of lesser quality, and there's no opportunity for price-based differentiation. Following aggregation is the export and import. I group these together because they're really more about contracting and basic logistics. But exporters do a hefty amount of pre-harvest financing for smallholder cooperatives. They do a hefty amount of training for the cooperatives that they're, or smallholder farmers that they're purchasing from. But here I'm just sort of referring to the contracting and logistics and warehousing and all the shipping that happens between export and import of countries. Yes?
How quickly does the coffee have to be consumed after it's picked?
It depends. Yes. We could talk about that in just a few minutes. Remind me if I don't bring it up when you see pretty colors on the screen. Then we get to manufacturing, and that's basically when you're the first transformation of the coffee into a consumable. So before that, it's all raw material, and then at the manufacturing or roasting centers where the packaging happens is where most of the value addition is happening between the coffee that's bought and sold at about $1 to actually today it's around $2 per pound, and that's where coffee then quickly jumps up in price because of various factors, but this is where your coffee then turns into a consumable that you're able to drink. And then finally, consumption for all of you who are hopefully drinking and enjoying the coffee as provided by Mandible. Thank you, Mandible. Any questions? Chain of custody. Yes, sir.
Question about aggregation. There is no processing plant or something just before it's sold, because nothing to be dehydrated.
Yes.
Before there is a process at this step.
Okay. So the question is in what step around aggregation does processing happen? Because you're very right that coffee needs to be exported about 12% moisture. So there needs to be a drying process. There needs to be some processing that happens before export, and that can be done either in the production system. If you're in Colombia, you are harvesting your own cherries and then depulping the seed and processing it right there on your own farms. In Rwanda, they deliver cherries to washing stations, and that would be the aggregation points, whether that is a washing station owned by a cooperative or a washing station that's owned by an exporter, right? So it's just you can sell either the raw cherry and then it gets processed, or you can sell parchment. You can sell wet parchment or dry parchment, and they all have different prices associated with it, with the type of value that you can add during different activities. And as I was saying before, most of those activities done on farm are done particularly by women. Question? Yes.
Again, I have a question about the prices, different steps. So you have, when you go further in the presentation, you have an idea about the prices of the production level, aggregation, export, manufacturing, and consumption.
I didn't put that in this one, but I have that.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's very raw. There's really been no strict cost of production analysis that's been done. And this is something that you'll see when I talk a little bit next about value chain governance. How when you're trying to basically take a coffee quality and not let it degrade all the way through to the point of consumption, just how the long arm of the buyer needs to continue to have more information about different processing so that they can build in those activities into their differential that they're paying for the higher quality. So
Yeah, because the best thing when you study the value chain and different steps is just trying to understand who is getting the most benefits. Because sometimes producers, they are selling
yeah.
the coffee at low costs
Yeah.
Manufacturing by 25 or 30% of the benefits.
Right.
So we need to understand how it's going on, different step, to understand the prices,
Absolutely.
the consumption level.
Absolutely, and it's very different between specialty grade coffee and just commodity, based on the governance of the value chain too. Sir?
I think that the price has an impact from the aggregation system when we talk about the washed and the fully washed. So the price comes
Right.
from that stage.
Right.
So we have to
Exactly.
inform people about that.
Yeah, depending on what type of processing you're doing and where you're doing that, that's what really complicates. There's no sort of umbrella cost of production analysis that you can put in, apply to coffee. So it's on a case-by-case basis. So moving on to specialty grade coffee, that's the industry in which I work in. There are four main aspects of specialty coffee that are differentiated from the market price, as I showed you earlier, which is based on substitutable contracts. So those are all contracts that are traded for future deliveries of coffee with specific substitutable qualifications. What specialty grade coffee really is it's based on what we call search attributes, experience attributes, credence attributes, and looking at the product as it's processed throughout the entire value chain. So it's not just looking at a product that's delivered. It's actually a lot of downstream or buyer-driven information that's being transferred to different points of the value chain, trying to reach into the production system and to deliver incentives for changing your production function to be able to produce high-quality coffee from the get-go. And this is my cheesy graphic. So this is when specialty coffee, you see, as I just said, sort of the long arm of the consuming market or the buyer-driven market. Search attributes are defined as those which can be verified at the time of transaction, and this also is referred to physical quality. So the physical quality of the lot of cherry that you're delivering to a washing station. How many underripe coffee cherries are you delivering? What percentage of your lot is actually going to be rejected? And then you get a certain price based on that. For buyers, what we do is we look at the actual processed coffee. So this is what we call green coffee. And we look at various physical attributes of a lot, the insect damage, the type of foreign material that's in it, basically everything that we want to reject out of the lot by the time we approve a sample. I say we. I used to be a coffee buyer for Gimme Coffee, but I'm no longer. So if I say we, I actually don't work in this world anymore. But yes, but this is, so these are the physical attributes that we look at when we're thinking about specialty grade coffee to begin with. Experience attributes, then these are the pretty colors. I forgot your question, but these are the colors that I was talking about. This is called the Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel, and basically specialty coffee that has no agricultural defects, that's very clean, that isn't defective at all, can have really amazing flavor, aroma, sweetness attributes, full of different types of acidities, malic acid, citric acid, and these are all inherent characteristics in coffee. So this is what the market will demand for specific types of coffee. So before you could see substitutable coffee that's based on something that's just plain, what we call a washed mild, and what my industry looks at is how can we differentiate between different lots based on different types of acidities, different sweetness levels, as well as the amount of agricultural defect that's in a specific lot of coffee. Credence attributes. Did you want to ask your question? I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, a quick question about the previous graphic. Is that a trained person that's just going around and determining where it falls in that pie chart?
Yes, that's a licensed coffee grader that will do that. But you can also, I mean, there are unlicensed or untrained people that are in the market, and they don't quite know how to use the same analysis tools as a coffee grader that's doing that for a specific organization, but they'll do it for their own standards, right? So they're going to set their own standards for the coffee that they're trying to contract with different importers and farmers. Credence attributes, and this is really where consumption or consumer market is trying to dictate the information that's being delivered to them, right? So with sort of the quality levels, that's more of a roaster demanded transformation of a market. The credence attributes, basically there are verification schemes that you can that sort of assess whether or not a production system or cooperative can meet requirements, specific sustainability requirements of different organizations, but that doesn't mean that every single lot of coffee that's being bought and sold has been assessed. That's just assessing the organizational level. So this is another aspect of what sort of contributes to sort of quality governance of quality coffee systems. And so finally, this really comes down to that last aspect that I talked about as the product through the process rather than the product itself. For the past year, I've been involved in a research project on the socioeconomic impacts of the relationship coffee model, which is basically, it's a vertically coordinated system, right? So when you're working with very different aspects of the supply chain and different actors, and your integration is not fully possible. You can't really control all of the costs. You can only do a sort of value mapping initiative to see what different activities contribute to what aspect of the production cycle. But the relationship coffee model is a vertical coordination. And so basically, it's working with different functional nodes of the value chain. It's very different from the spot transaction. There's ongoing relationships and associations, and building in more value into long-term relationships with the producers, and determining separate prices for the output. So separate prices for the type of coffee that you're producing. So key aspects of the relationship coffee model is the quality is buyer driven, as I've been talking about this whole time with specialty grade coffee and with quality in general. The information sharing is multi-directional, so while it is being buyer driven in terms of the type of quality and the type of information that needs to be shared, the producers and the aggregation centers have their own sort of ability to sort of interject and say, this is what we need, this is what you need, and this is how we can come together. Obviously, that's very touchy-feely, but that's sort of the ideal of what this type of purchasing scheme is all about. The trading attributes are transparent between parties, so we're not just buying and selling a raw contract. We're talking about very specific types of qualities that are contracted. Price discovery is not based solely on the market. So this is another aspect, as you were saying, with the types of value addition that are happening at different points. We're trying to sort of do a mapping initiative in many different specific value chains as to what kind of activities are you doing at your warehouse, what kind of activities are you doing at your washing station, what actually am I paying for if I'm paying you a differential or a quality premium. And the last is that incentives include price premiums, but also market access and other things as well. And so this incentive level structure is sort of where the relationship coffee model gets a little more complicated. So looking at a really nice graphic that I made, talking about what the outcomes and cyclical nature of this type of vertical coordination is actually trying to achieve, right? So it's basically looking at how different factors of production, different production functions can mitigate certain or work with or leverage certain environmental conditions, exogenous variables such as your altitude, your soil health, your geographic location, to produce a specific type of quality. Once you produce a specific type of quality, you have the ability to, perhaps you have the ability, if you have other types of human or social capital, to participate in different markets. Once you participate in different markets and you get your price premium or incentives, how that affects different sort of capital accumulation of to mitigate against shocks and to really help create a livelihood strategy, right? So that's sort of like the rough idea for how the market thinking is working for this sort of coordination scheme. But where it becomes really complicated is that most of the factors of production for your production system are done by different people who are delivering than people that are delivering the coffee to the market and receiving most of the market information. So when you have different value chain initiatives, either direct from a buyer into like a cooperative or a farming system that you've been purchasing from for many years, or you're looking at grant-funded projects that are dealing with capacity building initiatives for smallholder farmers. A lot of the incentives are targeted towards the wrong people, and so that's really where we are right now with the coffee industry, especially the specialty coffee industry is trying to figure out how to create sort of gender equity lens within supply chain development. And this is a very new initiative. We just kicked it off about 3 months ago, and that's sort of my full-time student research job right now, is to start working on that. Just to quickly just tell you more about women's work. So as I said before, that most of the harvesting, the pre-planting, and the planting are done by women, whether it's a smallholder farmer or themselves, or a landless laborer, let's say. And so a lot of the work is done. It's redundant, it's monotonous, there's low technical skill, but it's high labor. And sometimes, specifically in regions where you're able to have more labor-saving devices, these are the first jobs that get cut. Off-farm value chain labor, same deal. It's monotonous, redundant, lots of sorting. This is at a dry mill. This is after the coffee has been extracted from the cherry, it's been dried, and now it's getting ready for export. And all of these women are just sorting. So they're just sorting out defect. Obviously, this is an opportunity for them to gain income in the urban sphere, but again, this is one of the first activities to go with labor-saving devices, such as electronic eye sorters that get rid of all the defect for you. So when I'm looking into different supply chain development initiatives, both as a consultant and a student researcher, most of the initiatives for coffee supply chain is directed at these 4 categories, which is just technology and information diffusion, and that's coming from the governance structure of the buyer-driven model of this is the type of quality we want. Also thinking about production improvement and productivity. Capacity building initiatives for smallholder farmers and cooperatives to actually be able to mitigate against market risks primarily, but also environmental risks, as well as just sort of integrate yourself into a market or upgrade yourself into the value chain. The financial and asset transfers, that's mainly from multilateral institutions, as well as in small microfinance organizations that are working to improve pre-harvest financing for a lot of smallholder farmers. Again, this is a high-risk venture. And then CREDENCE standards for organizations like Fair Trade USA, where they receive grant funding to help upgrade or even create cooperatives in order to get them to achieve all of the standards for Fair Trade certified or for organic or things like that. So the issue, obviously, as I've mentioned, is that a lot of these incentive transfers or trying to trying to incentivize different types of production or different upgrading strategies. It's targeted mainly towards the men. I mean, women as well do some marketing, but it's a majority of men in Central America, in South America, in East Africa, that sort of have the market access point, right? They receive all the information, they receive pricing information, and that's more of the labor that and the individuals that these organizations, most of the supply chain development programs that I've looked into are targeting in all their workshopping. And so what we're proposing and what we're starting to do in the coffee industry now is what's called gender mapping. And so we're looking at specific activities done on farm as well as in cooperatives, whether processor level, but mainly at the household level, of who does what activities, what are the agricultural practices that you're practicing, how does that contribute to quality, and how are these activities separated from male to females. From that, who owns the productive assets in the household? Specifically, land is a huge issue. As everybody probably knows, for women-owned land and different assets for production. How are you able to use those to upgrade yourself into different types of value chains? Specifically for organic, this is a big issue as we see an increasing feminization of agriculture, men moving to cities to do for wage labor, women continuing to do the agricultural activities, yet not being able to own the land to maybe certify themselves as organic or to certify themselves with different sorts of upgrading strategies that are recommended. These are big issues for the agricultural sector for coffee production. From that, who does the decision making? Who's taking the money derived from the marketing activity and bringing it back into the household? How is that contributing back into obviously the nutrition of the household and the productive capability of the household, but also into the on-farm labor and the decisions that are going back into basically adoption, innovation into supply chains, and how that is sort of impacted by where you're directing these incentives through these programs. So that's that. How about that? Next, I'm going to talk about the Relationship Coffee Institute, unless anybody has any questions. Yes.
Are those patterns of gender that you're talking about pretty across the board? I'm wondering how much it varies between different coffee producing regions and groups of people.
There are differences, obviously, in terms of different types of specific activities that are more focused towards the women's work or ones that the men take on. Obviously, within those regions, you have a little bit of variance, but the case studies that I've read, it's pretty much across the board that most of the redundant activities, or I don't want to say redundant or monotonous, but yeah, all those activities are primarily the more invisible type of work that these sorts of value chain initiatives aren't really targeting properly. But obviously there is variation, especially in Rwanda, where there is a large percentage of female-owned farming systems because of the genocide. It's a very different reality in Rwanda than it is in say Nicaragua.
So as you're seeing this standardization of actual agricultural labor, are you also seeing that women are gaining more decision making in terms of what they do on their fields, or is that still
That's what we're looking into. So yeah, this is exactly the type of initiative that we're doing for the gender mapping, specifically in types of in specific regions in Central America. We're going to do one in Uganda for specific cooperatives. However, this is a very new process. So this is exactly the type of question that we're asking and trying to sort of understand in order to provide to the industry a more structured, efficient way of doing their job through the governance structure of the value chain.
So is the motivation for all of this research that these like buyer-driven specialty coffee chains are not working very well because you're targeting the information toward the marketers and they're not the producers exactly? Or is it that you're concerned that they're kind of working but that the benefits aren't being adequately distributed?
It's the latter.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they are working, it's just
Right.
the distribution of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're still not seeing. There's a lot of fear in the industry right now about the next sort of 20 years for coffee production as climates change, as demographics shift, as government investment into rural agricultural areas continues to decline, and for the opportunity for this type of cash crop, which can be highly differentiated and it's a very different value chain system, how that can provide some more benefits back to rural smallholder growers. We're looking at sort of the projection is that in 25 years, the majority of coffee will be produced by a handful of large producing countries that have well-educated farmers, that have direct-to-market strategies, and that have a lot of efficiencies on their farm. So where does that leave all of the other, 23 million smallholders and agricultural laborers that are working derive their income from coffee today? That's a really scary reality. So I think that a lot of it right now is to increase the ability for women in particular to have access to markets, to increase their capital in their own household, to protect against shocks, the rust outbreak, the market fluctuation, all of that stuff, to be able to really sort of enforce some of these strategies into rural areas.
I'm not sure that I have you correctly towards the end. Did you say that in Rwanda specifically, there's a lot more female-owned land, coffee producing land? Is that what you say in Rwanda specifically?
This is what the Relationship Coffee Institute has been doing their background research on. This is one of the reasons why they've decided to start their project in Rwanda, because of the need for female agriculture, in particular, and female households to have more upgrading strategies. Rwanda is a country that has really unique flavor profiles, and the value chain is pretty broken there. I mean, it's controlled by a small handful of exporters and processors. So what they're trying to do is really provide them opportunities, economic opportunities in both the rural and the urban landscape for upgrading strategies and to improve their income through coffee production.
And just a very quick follow-up on that one. Does that mean, I know you didn't mention too much, but in terms of, like, let's say cooperatives, are there some that are just female-owned or female-led or grouped together to what's that, or do you know?
Yes, there are. I would say, Nicaragua has plenty of female-run cooperatives, and they're awesome. In Rwanda, there's starting to be more of the collective action spirit around coffee production, and part of that is derived from the work that RCI is doing, but also from the specialty industry in general, just spending the past couple of years in development of the Rwandan specialty coffee industry.
You currently are mapping like the gender role, but you say also that this is a problem in the future. So are you planning to map in as well? What are your children? What are their expectations? What are the girls on farms doing?
Absolutely, and that's definitely one of the outcomes is more of this what we're considering to be intergenerational equity between the young boys and girls on farms now, and to sort of invest in rural areas to maybe prevent some of this sort of needless transfer into the the urban sphere, but also to increase educational opportunities for young girls and as well as boys. And so we're not just necessarily focusing on women, but we are focusing on how does the household as a unit sort of collaborate in different producing regions, and how do they have access to productive assets, and how do they make decisions based on the income derived from the activities and all that stuff. So it's pretty much whole family that we're thinking of.
A couple of questions. First question is about organic certification. So there is some coffee which is sold here in the US under the USDA certification organic. So we can apply this units outside of the US. So there is a commission that you have to do a control this, and then the product is shipped to the US. They get this certification outside of the US.
So no, there are other organizations that certify farming systems as organic. It's not USDA, but the standards match. Yeah.
So it's not the USDA label that they are.
No, the USDA would label my product as a roasted product, organic, based on the certificate chain all the way from the farmer.
The second question, we have an idea of performance, how they are paid. They are paid on base, how many hours they work per day, or how many bags they can get.
For pickers, they're generally paid by day. For the off-farm labor, they're primarily paid per day. Like in the warehouse with the sorting, they're paid a certain amount per day. They're not paid for the amount that they're actually sorting, right? And then a lot of, as the issue arises, a lot of the on-farm labor for your own household is not paid at all, right? So that's where that issue comes into play. Yes.
Going back to your model of your four approaches, the relationship coffee being the fourth, I'm going back to the credence-based one.
Yeah.
Are you, in using the relationship approach, are you pretty much discounting or eliminating the credence-based approach, or are you building on it? And specifically, with regard to, say, gender equity, which is evidently what we're starting with, would you expect the consumer to actually pay a premium, if you will, for coffee where gender equity is one of the outcomes of the system?
Some people are marketing coffee that are specific to, actually, last question first. Some organizations, some roasteries are marketing specific woman lots. It's come from a specific woman-run mill in Costa Rica, or this one is a specific woman cooperative in Rwanda or in Uganda. And Whole Foods is looking into it. They're a wholesale supplier called Allegro. It's the subsidiary roaster for them. They're starting to buy specific woman lots, and presumably they'll charge a premium for it. I don't know, but yeah, you could. But there are some organizations, some female women coffee organizations that are trying to create more standards. And Fair Trade USA, they're trying to incorporate more gender equity standards into their programming as well. So all of these organizations that third-party verification schemes are starting to really sort of beef up their gender equity approach. And this is one of the things that one of the sectors that we're trying to target with our analysis into gender mapping and production. There are other organizations that, microfinancers that are starting to really increase their portfolio of organizations that they're lending to, and they're trying to target these processing units that have more women that are in positions of power, what they're calling hidden influencers, to actually try and change the market, the downstream market from the processing side. So there are premiums that will start to be built into it. Like if we start doing more of these value addition, value mapping, and gender mapping to see, what actually are organizations really starting to invest more in, and how is that going to contribute to a higher differential that then the consumer will have to take on and pay for. And some consumers are actually demanding this type of stuff. So. Yeah.
But then in addition to that, your relationship building will also intervene. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, more directly so that you, say, just for example, would try to develop, say, more direct ties between your Rwandan, female-headed cooperatives and say, give me coffee or something like that?
Right.
So you essentially play a sort of a broker role to shorten that value chain? Are you doing some of that too in relationship with coffee?
In relationship, no, it's building upon sort of structures that are already there and really utilizing or utilizing the middlemen, right? We're not trying to get rid of, because that actually is going to increase our transaction costs, believe it or not. So a lot of people have tried to do that, and then they pretty much always go back to we need importers, we need them to hold the risk for coffee when it's being transported and all this other stuff. So we're not trying to shorten the value chain. We're just trying to figure out what are the margins that everyone's making, and are they fair margins, and so that's part of the whole information sharing aspect of it. Terry?
Based on what we know about consumer behavior in North America and Europe and places that drink lots of coffee, how big a slice of the market is specialty in relationship of these 23 million smallholders that you alluded to? Are these emerging value chains based on relationships going to be wrestling with each other for a really tiny slice of the overall market, or is there? Do you see a lot of opportunity and likelihood for growth in these specialty and relationship value chains?
Yeah, so it's difficult to come up with an accurate percentage of what this sort of specialty or quality based value chains make up in terms of all total coffee production, especially Arabica production, because for specialty coffee, when the Specialty Coffee Association of America is talking about specialty grade coffee, they're talking specifically about the search and experiential attributes, and the more credence based ones that are of certified coffee products, that's definitely a whole different percentage. That all of these are increasing year over year. I see that while certain organizations, certain roasters are trying to sort of step away from fair trade because they're not, they're leaving a lot of information sort of untapped, and they're not actually doing a lot of the value chain or impact analysis that roasters want. So they're starting to actually invest in their own sustainability standards and get organizations that they work with year over year to produce against their own certification standards. Starbucks did this as well with their cafe practices. So the consuming market is definitely catching on. They're not necessarily fully catching on to coffee as being differentiated by quality such as wine, but they are. There is a lot of demand for these type of quality attributes that it's just going to continue to grow.
I had a question on I'm not sure it's fully formed, but I was thinking, you talked a little bit about using the existing structures. I'm trying to understand, in terms of relationship, let's say, with government. What comment, or what can you say is I don't know whether I'm looking at regulation but can you comment on anything about, in terms of relationship with government, is it existing structures? Is there a place where you experience barriers, or how is that in terms of governments, right? Like let's say Rwanda or any other things? What types of relationships exist?
The Rwandan, let me just answer it this way: that I'm not. Most of my research is not in government policy, but I do know from my experience as a buyer that, for instance, as I talked to Jean-Marie about, that the centralized government structure and their interjection into the marketing system in Burundi completely kills any opportunity for upgrading into the value chain for smallholder farmers and processors. The governments, the managers of the soja stalls will come up with a price, some arbitrary price for a lot of coffee very often, and that doesn't reflect anything in relation to quality or in relation to the market. So it's in that way, the argument is for more of a decentralized government structure, not really involved in the market at all, and to be able to sort of let the market regulate itself. I know that's a really difficult for many people to agree with, but that's sort of the structure that sort of needs to happen in order for this value chain to offer the incentives. And it's very, I mean, it's a small slice right now in terms of the overall global picture for a global value chain for coffee, but it's an opportunity for smallholders that are actually, you know, built around these types of, the communities that are built around these types of quality attributes to and information sharing to find successful ventures. And I think that this is where the concern of the industry and who's going to be producing our specialty coffee in the future, where is that going to come from, where are we going to get the most information coming from smallholder farmers in rural areas.
Do you find that most of these smallholders are mainly dependent on coffee as a subsistence or as a livelihood, or they have that as a small part of a bigger farming system?
It depends. It depends on your region. In Colombia, coffee production is pretty much a sole household activity. They do have their community garden plots sometimes, and own household garden plots. But coffee production takes up a majority of their land. For if you own 3 hectares, about 2.5 will typically be in coffee production. In Indonesia, they have more of a diversification strategy, which kills their industry a little bit because they're not able to capitalize on some more efficiency gains. But they'll intercrop with peppers or citrus, and so that's a very complicated production system for them. But yeah, it depends on where you go, and sort of that's all part of the context analysis that we're hoping that these buyer-driven strategies can start to use more often. Okay, I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to buzz through this because now it's all just about pretty pictures. The Relationship Coffee Institute is a small team that is the nonprofit sister company of a for-profit importer based in Portland, Oregon. It's called Sustainable Harvest, and they are the pioneers of the relationship coffee model. They run their for-profit organization as if it were an NGO. It's very mission-driven, really low revenue structure for them right now, but they're really working. They invest a lot of their revenue back into their supply chains, and they do a lot of training with their coffee producers. They have all those check marks there on the world map. Those represent different offices that they have in producing countries. So they're able to really do a lot of training and workshops and capacity building initiatives with the cooperatives that they're working with. They also are the founders of an amazing conference that happens every year called Let's Talk Coffee, and it basically brings together suppliers, processors, NGOs, microfinance people, multilateral institutions, buyers together in the same room to talk about a lot of the issues that everyone is facing. And so to come up with solutions for their specific supply, but also in general. The objective of the Rwanda project of RCI, and I'll just make this clear right now, this is the first project of RCI, and this one is just to improve the livelihood of low-income women through training, transparent trade, improved quality, and higher prices. So everything that's in the sort of the private industry context, taking that relationship coffee model and moving it into the development context in order to create a value chain within Rwanda, which is a very lofty goal, and more analysis is sort of being done onto what kind of impacts they're going to have, because they're still building out certain components in the urban sphere. Really important thing to note about their project partners is that it's funded primarily from Bloomberg Philanthropies. So Michael Bloomberg and, oh boy, what is her name? Verna Eggleston is sort of his right-hand person trying to do the investment and the strategy for RCI to create these value chains. They also leverage workshops and opportunities from the Women for Women International Center that's based in Rwanda. Women for Women International have a year-long program that teaches low-income women in rural areas literacy skills, numeracy skills, life skills. And so what the Rwanda project does is leverages the participants in these programs, the graduates from these programs, to start doing value chain upgrading strategies for them, as well as the government of Rwanda is also a partner in this. These are the districts in which they're working: Musanze, Kayonza, and Nyaguru. Those are the rural areas where they started doing cooperative development and working with the rural areas, the rural smallholder farmers. And in Kigali is where they're going to start doing these urban social enterprises. They're going to create a cafe. They're going to create a certified lab to start doing quality grading and potentially, eventually, some export or some independent third-party analysis on coffee quality. And those will all be sort of woman-run enterprises. But that's not to say that the activities that they're not doing don't focus on gender inclusiveness for entire households. It's just that they're starting to focus. They started their focus on women-run enterprises. Their outputs: agronomic assistance, quality analysis, origin information exchange, cooperative capacity building, urban social enterprises, and premium sharing groups. And so when I was there with the AWARE grant, I was working on their quality analysis training platform, and now I'm working on their premium sharing group platform, which I can talk to you about in a little bit. Now I'm just going to show you the pictures because we're running out of time. So here's some photos of agronomic assistants. If you have questions, you can raise your hand. Basically, they do a lot of pruning techniques. These women have donated or have bought into a cooperative and donated some land, and they're basically starting from the ground up. So they're working together, but they also have their own household farm that's in a different area. So this is where the agronomic assistance comes into play, is at the cooperative level, but then the women act as trainers for their own communities and for children and for other men who are participating in these activities. So they're seen as the trainers for these regions. Quality analysis. Basically, I took many of these women trainers through what constitutes a defective coffee in the market, what constitutes a high-quality coffee in the market, paired that up with some of the agronomy practices that they've been learning, and so to really just sort of solidify the concepts. Let's Talk Coffee. As I mentioned before, it brings together different people of the supply chain, different actors, different direct participants, as well as supporters of the supply chain. This is a woman from Colombia, so we had different farmers from different parts of the world come and talk to these women farmers in Rwanda to sort of discuss similar challenges and ideas, information sharing, basically for meeting some of these challenges. Organizational development, they're just starting to work more further with cooperative structure and developing internal systems, business systems with the Women for Women International graduates. And now they're working on their urban social enterprise, which they're going to purchase coffee from the participants in the rural areas and then transform it into what's becoming a burgeoning market in Kigali. So there are a lot of small cafes, small specialty type cafes, like similar to what you would see here, focusing on drink preparation, beverage preparation, quality coffee, and an environment where people can relax and do their own social networking. So this is something that's really starting to pop up in Kigali, and so they're taking advantage of this market. They're going to basically run these organizations through what's called premium sharing groups. And those are just different cooperatives and different business structures to work together to share some of the information and price premium back, so more as a revolving fund for the participants of this organization. They're also building a third-party quality lab, premium sharing group. and their focus more now on gender inclusiveness. So whereas they want the women to sort of run the social enterprises, they're going to focus more on the impacts of total households and for men, women, and children. And that's it.